Billionaire in disguise, humiliated for eating with groundskeeper, but she owns the club. The air in the Oakwood Crest Country Club boardroom was thick with the scent of old money and fresh panic. It smelled of lemon polish and fear. At the head of the immense mahogany table, Mr. and Mrs. Miller sat frozen, their faces pale masks of disbelief. Before them stood a woman in an emerald green gown that shimmered like a kingfisher's wing under the crystal chandelier. Her hair, a magnificent crown of silver and black coils, was styled with regal simplicity. In her hand, she held a single document. It was not a weapon. It was just paper. But in the hushed, suffocating silence of that room, it held more power than any weapon ever could. Mrs. Miller's perfectly painted lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her eyes, which had always held a look of bored, dismissive appraisal, were now wide with a dawning horror. She was looking at the woman before her, truly seeing her for the first time. And what she saw terrified her. If you want to know how a single piece of paper can unravel a dynasty of pride, how the quietest man in the room can become the most powerful, and how a simple plate of food can be worth more than $1 billion fortune, then you need to subscribe to Channel Name. We tell the stories that matter. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Adaeze Nwosu was a woman forged in the fires of Owerri and refined in the boardrooms of Atlanta. At 52, she carried the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who had built an empire from intellect and sheer will. Her net worth was a staggering $2.1 billion, a figure composed of shrewd tech investments, strategic real estate holdings, and a portfolio so diverse it mirrored the complexities of her own mind. This wealth was a fortress built brick by digital brick to protect her from the precariousness she remembered from her youth, yet she lived outside its walls. She resided in a modest, elegant home in Decatur, not the sprawling mansions of Buckhead her peers occupied. Her daily uniform consisted of simple linen, trousers, soft cotton shirts, and a pair of worn-in walking shoes that had seen more miles of city pavement than the gleaming interiors of a limousine. She found clarity in simplicity, a principle instilled in her by her mother, a woman whose wisdom was as vast and deep as the Niger River. Her skin, the color of rich dark earth after cleansing rain, was bare of makeup. Her hands, though they signed checks with enough zeros to alter economies, were unadorned and often bore the faint trace of soil from her garden. Adaeze had lost her husband, the great love of her life, 2 decades prior. After his passing, she had channeled her grief into her work, building and building as if constructing a tower tall enough to speak to him in the heavens. But now, at the pinnacle of that tower, she found the air thin and the silence profound. The money was a number, a tool, but it was not a companion. It could not fill the echoing space in her heart that longed for the simple, grounding connection of her homeland. Each morning, she would take a long walk, a ritual that anchored her day. Her route often took her past the manicured perfection of the Oakwood Crest Country Club, a bastion of old Atlanta money and rigid social hierarchy. She paid it little mind, seeing it as a beautifully landscaped cage for people who measured worth in pedigrees and stock options. But one morning, her attention was caught not by the rolling green lawns, but by a sound. It was the gentle, lyrical cadence of Wolof, a language she'd heard in the vibrant markets of West Africa. An elderly man was tending to a bed of prize-winning roses near the wrought iron fence, speaking softly into an old flip phone. He was tall and slender, with a back that was still straight despite his 70 years. His skin was the color of polished mahogany, and his hair was a cap of dignified silver white. His name was Mamadou, originally from Dakar, Senegal, and he was the club's head groundskeeper. For 30 years, Mamadou had been the invisible hand that painted the landscape of Oakwood Crest. He arrived before the sun and left after it had set. He knew the name of every tree, the preference of every flower, and the mood of the sky. He treated the earth with a reverence that the club's members reserved for their stock portfolios, and he treated every person with the same quiet, unwavering respect, whether it was the club president or the young man who delivered the linens. His goodness was constitutional, not situational. It was simply who he was. Adaeze slowed her walk, listening. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the warmth, the love in his tone as he spoke to what sounded like a grandchild far away. When he hung up, he looked up and saw her watching. A gentle smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. Bonjour, he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. Good morning, Adaeze replied, a smile touching her own lips. It is a beautiful language you speak. It is the sound of home, Mamadou said simply. You are from our side of the world, I think. Yes, Adaeze said, feeling a flicker of warmth she hadn't realized she was missing. Owerri, in Nigeria. Ah, the Igbo people, strong and clever, he nodded with respect. I am from Dakar, Senegal. And so began a simple, unexpected friendship. Each morning, they would exchange a few words over the fence. She learned about his family back in Dakar, his pride in his grandchildren's education. He learned about her love for gardening, the specific type of hibiscus her mother grew in Owerri. They never spoke of work or wealth. They spoke of soil, of family, of the taste of a ripe mango, of the feeling of the Harmattan wind. Their conversations were a small shared oasis in a world that often felt like a desert. One Friday, as their chat concluded, Mamadou's face lit up with the thought. Sister Adaeze, he began, using the respectful term as if they had known each other for a lifetime. On Sundays, the staff are allowed one guest for lunch in the side dining hall. It is not fancy, but the food is good. I would be honored if you would join me this weekend. I bring my own lunch from home. Tiboudien, the best of Senegal. The offer was so pure, so uncalculated, it caught Adaeze off guard. No one had invited her for a simple meal in years. Invitations for her were always transactions. Gala dinners, charity auctions, strategic lunches where something was always wanted. But this was just a man offering to share his food. It was an invitation not to the billionaire investor, but to the woman who missed the sound of home. I would be delighted, Mamadou, she said, her voice softer than she intended. Thank you. I would like that very much. She had no idea that this simple act of kindness was about to place them both in the crosshairs of a cruelty as manicured and as cold as the club's perfect lawn. She did not know that this humble invitation would set in motion a chain of events that would expose the rot beneath the polished veneer of Oakwood Crest and change all of their lives forever. But for now, all she felt was a quiet, hopeful joy. She was going to have lunch with a friend. On Sunday, Adaeze dressed in her usual manner, a simple gray linen dress and her comfortable walking shoes. She carried no purse, just her keys and phone in a pocket. As she approached the grand entrance of Oakwood Crest, she felt a slight unease. The gleaming luxury cars pulling up to the valet stand were a stark contrast to her arrival on foot. Men in crisp golf attire and women in expensive brunch dresses floated past her, their conversations a murmur of stock tips and vacation plans. They looked through her, their eyes gliding over her plain form as if she were part of the landscape, no more significant than a shrub. Mamadou was waiting for her just inside the doors, his face breaking into that familiar, warm smile. He was wearing his Sunday best, a neatly pressed shirt and trousers, a far cry from his daily work clothes. He looked distinguished, his age lending him an air of quiet nobility. Sister Adaeze, you have come. Welcome, he said, his eyes shining with genuine pleasure. I wouldn't miss it, Mamadou, she replied, feeling her unease melt away in the warmth of his greeting. He led her not through the main opulent dining room with its soaring ceilings and panoramic views of the golf course, but down a side hallway to a smaller, plainer room. This was where the staff took their meals. The tables were simple, the chairs unadorned, but the room was filled with the lively chatter of kitchen staff, servers, and other groundskeepers enjoying their break. The atmosphere was warm and collegial. Mamadou led her to a small table in the corner. From a warm but clean insulated bag, he produced two containers. The moment he opened the first one, a fragrant cloud of steam filled the air around them. It was the scent of tiaboudienne, the rich, complex aroma of fish cooked in a savory tomato and vegetable stew served over perfectly broken rice. It smelled of Jollif's cousin, a scent that was both exotic and deeply familiar. It was the smell of celebration, of community, of home. My wife's recipe, Mamadou said with a proud smile, spooning a generous portion onto a plate for her. She says, I cannot survive a week in America without it. Adaeze laughed, a real unburdened sound, a wise woman. As she took her first bite, the flavors exploded on her tongue, the savory fish, the sweet carrots, the earthy cassava, all absorbed by the flavorful rice. It was more satisfying than any Michelin-starred meal she had ever been served in a sterile, silent restaurant. Here, eating this food with this good man, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. They ate and talked, their conversation flowing easily. They spoke of the differences between Igbo and Wolof wedding traditions, of the best way to cook plantains, of the stubborn pride of firstborn children. For the first time in a long time, Adaeze wasn't a CEO or an investor. She was just Adaeze, sharing a meal. Their peaceful lunch was shattered by the arrival of two figures who moved through the staff dining hall as if they were slumming royalty. It was Mr. and Mrs. Miller, the club's president and his wife, the self-appointed arbiters of Oakwood Crest's suffocating exclusivity. Mrs. Miller, a woman whose face was pulled into a permanent expression of disapproval, was dressed in a white Chanel suit that seemed to radiate a sterile coldness. Her husband trailed behind her, his portly figure encased in a blue Brioni blazer, a look of smug authority on his face. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw Adaeze sitting with Mamadou. Mrs. Miller's eyes swept over Adaeze's simple dress and worn shoes with undisguised contempt. Her gaze was a physical thing, an icy current that made the warm room feel suddenly cold. Mamadou, she said, her voice sharp and dripping with condescension. What is the meaning of this? Mamadou rose slowly from his chair, his expression calm, but his back straight. Good afternoon, Mrs. Miller, Mr. Miller. This is my guest, Sister Adaeze. Your guest, Mr. Miller scoffed, his eyes raking over Adaeze. The staff guest privilege is meant for family, Mamadou, not for vagrants you pick up off the street. Adaeze's fork froze halfway to her mouth. A cold knot of anger began to form in her stomach. She remained silent, her eyes watchful, wanting to see how Mamadou would handle this. She is my friend, Mamadou said, his voice quiet but firm. She is my guest. She is welcome at my table. Mrs. Miller let out a short, ugly laugh. Your table? This is our club, Mamadou, not your personal soup kitchen. We have standards. We have an image to maintain. An image that does not include this. She gestured vaguely at Adaeze, a flick of the wrist that dismissed her entire existence. The chatter in the room had died down. Everyone was watching, their faces a mixture of fear and sympathy for Mamadou. I do not understand the problem, Mamadou stated, his dignity a shield against their vitriol. We are causing no disturbance. The problem, Mrs. Miller hissed, stepping closer, is her presence. It lowers the tone. It's an embarrassment. Members have seen her come in with you. They are asking questions. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant for him, but loud enough for Adaeze to hear clearly. This is a private club, not a public park, Mamadou. We don't admit charity cases. The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Charity cases. It wasn't just an insult, it was a complete erasure of Adaeze's humanity, a branding based on nothing more than the simplicity of her clothes. It was the casual, reflexive cruelty of people who only valued others for their utility or their status. Adaeze slowly placed her fork down on her plate. She looked at Mrs. Miller, her gaze level and unblinking. For a fleeting moment, she considered unleashing the storm of her power, of telling them exactly who she was. She could buy and sell their entire lineage with the interest earned on her accounts in a single day. But she held back. This was not about her power. It was about Mamadou's dignity. Mamadou's shoulders slumped slightly, the first sign that their cruelty had found its mark. He had worked at this club for 30 years. He had poured his life into its soil, and in 30 seconds, they had made him feel like a trespasser in his own workplace. I believe it is time for us to leave, Adaeze said, her voice calm and even, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. She stood up, her movements deliberate and graceful. I believe you are right, Mr. Miller said with a sneer, and don't bother bringing her back. She is no longer welcome on these premises. As of this moment, she is banned from Oakwood Crest. He then turned his glare on Mamadou. And you, we will be discussing your flagrant disregard for the club's rules on Monday morning. Don't think this will be overlooked. With a final withering look at them both, the Millers turned and swept out of the room, leaving a trail of chilled, humiliated silence in their wake. Mamadou looked at the half-eaten plate of thieboudien, his Sunday treat, now tainted by the ugliness of the encounter. He looked at Adaeze, his face etched with shame and apology. Sister Adaeze, he whispered, his voice thick with regret. I am so sorry. I did not mean for this to happen. Adaeze placed a gentle hand on his arm. You have nothing to be sorry for, Mamadou, she said, her voice firm. You offered me friendship. They offered us hate. Let's go. She walked with him out of the club, past the valets and the luxury cars, past the members who now stared at them with open curiosity and scorn. The sun felt harsh, the beautiful day spoiled. They walked in silence until they were outside the imposing wrought iron gates. The club, with its perfect green lawns and its ugly hollow heart, was now behind them. They stood on the public sidewalk, two people of grace cast out from a place that had none. The humiliation was a raw, open wound. Adaeze felt a burning in her eyes, not for herself, but for the good man standing beside her who had been so cruelly debased for the simple act of sharing his lunch. The world outside the gates of Oakwood Crest felt different. The air, no longer filtered by the club's aura of manufactured perfection, was thick with the scent of city traffic and sun-baked asphalt. Mamadou stood beside Adaeze, his shoulders still slumped, the earlier joy of their shared meal completely extinguished. He looked at the imposing gates, the place where he had invested 3 decades of his life, and his expression was one of profound sadness. He had been made to feel like a stranger in his own home. He carried the insulated bag with the remains of their lunch. He looked down at it, then at Adaeze. Her face was a mask of calm, but he could see the hurt shimmering in her eyes. He saw not a stranger, but a sister from his continent, a guest he had invited into his world, only to have that world spit her out. In his culture, the host was responsible for the guest's comfort and safety. He felt he had failed her utterly. Adaeze was about to speak, to tell him again that this was not his fault, but he held up a hand, stopping her. Without a word, he walked over to a simple stone bench near a bus stop, a piece of public furniture worlds away from the plush upholstery inside the club. He sat down and patted the space beside him. Adaeze hesitated for a moment, then joined him. He placed the bag on his lap and opened it. The scent of the thieboudien, slightly cooled but still fragrant, rose to meet them. He took out the second container, the one with his own portion, still untouched. He also took out the fork he had packed for himself. He looked at Adaeze, his eyes clear and direct, filled with the sorrow that went beyond the immediate insult. It was the sorrow of a man who had once again been reminded that in this new country, his dignity was conditional. They have taken our peace, he said, his voice a low rumble. They will not take our meal. It was a declaration of defiance, a small, powerful act of resistance against the dehumanizing force they had just faced. Adaeze watched, mesmerized, as he took the clean fork and offered the container to her. Please, he said, finish your lunch. Adaeze shook her head. No, Mamadou, that is yours. I couldn't. We will share it, he insisted. Today, we are 2 people from Africa, sitting on a bench. There is enough for 2. But Adaeze felt a knot in her throat so tight she couldn't possibly swallow. The public humiliation, the casual cruelty, the dismissal, it all coalesced into a single, sharp point of pain. It wasn't the insult to her, the billionaire. It was the wound inflicted on this kind, gentle man. A single tear escaped her eye and traced a hot path down her cheek. Then another. Soon, her carefully constructed composure crumbled, and she began to weep. It was a silent, wrenching sob, born of a loneliness she rarely acknowledged, and a righteous fury she had suppressed moments before. She wept for Mamadou's 30 years of loyal service being repaid with contempt. She wept for the simple, beautiful moment of connection that had been so brutally destroyed. She wept for the fact that even with all her billions, she couldn't protect this good man from the ugliness of the world. Mamadou did not move away. He did not offer platitudes or try to quiet her. He simply sat beside her, a steady, silent presence, letting her grief run its course. He understood tears were a language that needed no translation. After several long minutes, her sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. She wiped her eyes, feeling exposed and exhausted. "I am sorry," she whispered, embarrassed. "Tears are just rain for the soul," Mamadou said softly, his voice full of a grandfather's kindness. "Let it wash." He waited another moment, then pushed the container of food gently toward her again. His expression was serious, his intent clear. This was no longer just about lunch. It was about reclaiming their humanity. "You are hungry," he said, his words simple, direct, and devastatingly profound. "I have food. It is simple." This was it, the kind invitation, an unconditional offering of care that cut through all the noise of status, wealth, and prejudice. He didn't know she could buy 100 restaurants. He didn't know she could end the miller's reign with a single phone call. He only saw a person who was hungry, who was hurting, and his response was to give what he had. This simple act of sharing his own meal on a public bench outside the gates of his own humiliation was the most profound gift Adaeze had ever received. It was a plate of food that represented dignity, grace, and an unbreakable spirit. It was a sacrifice. This was his one special meal of the week, a taste of home, and he was offering it to her without a second thought. Adaeze looked at the rich, fragrant rice and fish. She looked at Mamadou's earnest, kind face, and she understood that this was the real wealth. This was the true currency of humanity. She took the container from him. "Thank you, Mamadou," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." They shared the tibouti, passing the single fork back and forth there on the public bench. The cars of the wealthy members of Oakwood Crest drove past them, their occupants likely sparing them no more than a passing glance, seeing only a groundskeeper and a poor woman sharing a meager meal. They were strangers with big eyes, but they saw nothing. They couldn't see the billion-dollar deal being forged in that moment, not a deal of money, but of loyalty and justice. As they finished the last grain of rice, Adaze's tears were gone, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. The hurt had crystallized into purpose. The Millers had made a critical mistake. They had not merely insulted a wealthy woman in disguise, they had harmed her friend, and for that, there would be a reckoning. The next morning, the reckoning began. Mamadou arrived at work to be met by the club's general manager, a man who took his orders directly from the Millers. He was informed, in a cold and impersonal tone, that he was suspended for 2 weeks without pay for violating the club's guest policy and causing a disturbance. He was to hand over his keys and leave the premises immediately. There was no discussion, no chance to defend himself. 30 years of service were dismissed in a 30-second conversation. As Mamadou walked away from the club, the place he had tended with more care than his own small garden, he felt a profound sense of injustice. The suspension without pay was not just an inconvenience. For a man his age, living on a modest salary, it was a significant financial blow. He called Adaeze to tell her what had happened, his voice heavy with resignation, not anger. He was not a man given to outrage, but Adaeze felt enough outrage for them both. "This is unacceptable, Mamadou," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "This will not stand." After she hung up, she sat in her quiet study, the morning light streaming through the window. But she felt no warmth. All she felt was a glacial calm. the kind that precedes a storm. The Millers thought they were punishing a powerless old man. They had no idea they had just declared war on a queen. Adaeze picked up her phone. Her first call was not to a lawyer, but to her mother in Owerri. She needed to hear her voice, to ground herself in the wisdom that had always been her compass. She explained the situation in Igbo, the words flowing more easily, carrying the weight of her anger and hurt. Her mother listened patiently, her silence a comforting presence across the continents. When Adaeze finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice frail, but her words as strong as ironwood. Ada M, she said, my daughter, do you remember the proverb I taught you? A stranger has big eyes but sees nothing. These people, they looked at you, but they did not see you. They saw only what their small minds could understand. They are blind. Do not let their blindness become your rage. Let it become your clarity. The words settled Adaeze's spirit. Her mother was right. Rage was a fire that consumed itself. Clarity was a lens that focused power. What they did to that good man, Mamadou, her mother continued, is a debt. And in this life, all debts are paid. You will be the one to deliver the bill. I will, Mama, Adaeze promised. Good. Now go and be my daughter. With her mother's blessing, Adaeze's path was clear. She made her second call. It was to an old friend, a man named Tunde Adebayo, the head of one of the most powerful private equity firms in the country. Tunde, my brother, how are you? She began. Adaeze, to what do I owe the honor? His booming voice answered. I have a project for you, she said, her tone all business. There is a property I wish to acquire, quietly and quickly. It's called the Oakwood Crest Country Club. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. Oakwood Crest? That's old money, Ada. Very private. They're not for sale. Everything is for sale, Tunde, Adaeze replied, a chill in her voice. You and I both know that. The club is a registered corporation. It has a board, it has shares, and more importantly, it has debt. I want you to find that debt. I want you to buy it, all of it. And then I want you to find the shareholders who are over-leveraged and quietly desperate. Make them offers they cannot refuse. I want controlling interest. I don't care what it costs. This sounds personal, Tunde observed. It is, she confirmed. They have incurred a debt I am here to collect. For the next 10 days, while Mamadou sat at home, his routine broken and his spirit wounded, a silent financial hurricane was gathering force. Tunde's team worked with surgical precision. They discovered the club was carrying a significant mortgage from a regional bank that was eager to offload the note. Adaeze bought it instantly. They identified 3 board members whose personal fortunes had been hit hard in the last market downturn. Confidential offers were made through shell corporations, offering them double the market value for their voting shares. They accepted without hesitation. Bit by bit, share by share, Adaeze consolidated power. The Millers, wrapped in their bubble of arrogance, were oblivious. They were busy planning the club's annual membership gala, completely unaware that the ground was crumbling beneath their feet. On the 11th day, Adaeze held 58% of the voting shares of Oakwood Crest Properties, Inc. She was, for all intents and purposes, the owner. The club was hers. Her final call was to the club's general manager. This is Adaeze Nwosu, she said. The manager, recognizing the name from the incident report, was immediately hostile. I'm sorry, Ms. Nwosu, but as you were informed, you are not welcome. I am not calling for permission to enter, Adaeze interrupted, her voice like steel. I am calling to inform you that I have scheduled an emergency board meeting. It will take place tomorrow at 10 a.m. in the main boardroom. You will ensure that every single board member is present, especially the Millers. And one more thing. What? The manager asked, bewildered. You will call Mr. Mamadou TM, she instructed. You will apologize for his suspension. You will reinstate him with full back pay, effective immediately. And you will tell him that his presence is required at the meeting tomorrow as my personal guest of honor. Silence. Did you hear me? Adaeze asked. Yes, ma'am, the manager stammered, the shift in power finally dawning on him. Good, Adaeze said and hung up. The storm was about to make landfall. The next morning, The boardroom at Oakwood Crest was simmering with tension and confusion. The board members, summoned so abruptly, whispered amongst themselves. The Millers sat at the head of the table, looking annoyed and imperious. They assumed this was a minor revolt from the members whose shares had been bought out. "What is the meaning of this absurdity?" Mr. Miller demanded of the general manager, who stood nervously by the door. "Who called this meeting?" Before he could answer, the grand double doors of the boardroom swung open. Adaeze Nwosu entered, but this was not the woman they had thrown out of the staff dining hall. This was not the woman in the simple linen dress and worn shoes. This was a vision of power. She wore a bespoke gown of emerald green silk that flowed around her like liquid light. Her natural hair, a stunning mix of silver and black, was styled in an elegant upsweep that highlighted the proud line of her neck and jaw. She wore no jewelry except for a pair of simple diamond earrings. She needed no other adornment. Her presence was the jewel. Behind her, looking dignified but slightly overwhelmed, was Mamadou. He was dressed in his Sunday best, his face a mixture of confusion and loyalty. He had come because Adaeze had asked him to. Gas rippled through the room. It was her, the woman from the dining hall. Ms. Miller's face, which had been a mask of irritation, contorted into a snarl of disbelief and fury. "You! What are you doing here? I told you, you are banned from this property. Security. Your security now works for me," Adaeze said, her voice calm and resonant, filling the large room. She walked to the head of the table opposite the Millers and placed the leather portfolio down. Mamadou stood quietly behind her, his presence a silent testament to the reason they were all there. "This meeting will come to order," Adaeze announced. She did not shout. She did not need to. Her authority was absolute. "You have no authority here," Mr. Miller blustered, his face turning a blotchy red. "On the contrary," Adaeze said, opening the portfolio, "I have all of it." She slid a single document across the polished mahogany table. It was a summary of share ownership, clear and undeniable. It showed her name and the name of her holding company next to a number 58%. A wave of murmurs swept through the room as the board members craned their necks to see. Mr. Miller snatched the paper, his eyes scanning it frantically. The color drained from his face. He looked at his wife, his expression one of pure, unadulterated panic. They saw it. They saw everything. Their power, their prestige, their entire world evaporating before their eyes. "How?" Mrs. Miller whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "You assumed I was poor because of how I was dressed," Adaeze said, her eyes locking onto Mrs. Miller's. "You assumed I was powerless because of the company I kept. You saw a simple dress and you thought you saw a beggar. You saw a black woman eating with the groundskeeper and you thought you saw a charity case." She said the words, charity case, with a precise surgical coldness. The cruel dismissal, once a weapon of their arrogance, was now a mirror reflecting their own ugliness. Mrs. Miller flinched as if she had been struck. "A stranger has big eyes," Adaeze continued, her voice softening slightly as she quoted her mother, "but sees nothing. You looked right at me, but you didn't see me at all. What you failed to see was a woman who values character over currency and dignity over decor." She turned her gaze to the rest of the board. 10 days ago, I was a guest in this club, invited by the most honorable man on your payroll, Mr. Mamadou TM. We were sharing a meal, we were disturbing no one, and we were treated with a contempt that would be shameful if directed at an animal, let alone a human being. She recounted the entire incident, her voice steady and clear. She described their sneers, their insults, their public humiliation of a man who had given this club 30 years of his life. With each word, the Millers seemed to shrink in their chairs. "You didn't just ban me from this club," Adaeze said, her voice rising with controlled passion. "You suspended this good man. You docked his pay. You attempted to strip him of his livelihood and his dignity for the crime of showing simple human kindness." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the suffocating silence. "Well, today, the bill for that debt has come due. As the majority shareholder and new president of the board of Oakwood Crest, my first act is to announce some changes. She looked at the Millers. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, your positions on this board are terminated, effective immediately. Your membership at this club is revoked. You will vacate the premises within the hour. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a corporate execution, swift and total. Secondly, she continued, turning to the rest of the board. The bylaws of this club will be rewritten. The discriminatory membership practices end today. This club will become a place of community, not exclusion. We will sponsor scholarships for underprivileged youth. We will open our doors to community events. We will become a part of Atlanta, not an island apart from it. She then turned and placed a hand on Mamadou's shoulder. She looked at him, her eyes full of respect and gratitude. But my most important act is this, she said, her voice softening. She looked back at the stunned audience. I am promoting Mr. Mamadou Thiam to the position of General Manager of Operations for Oakwood Crest. If the room had been silent before, it was now utterly breathless. Mamadou's eyes widened in shock. He started to shake his head to protest, but Adaeze held his shoulder firmly. For 30 years, Adaeze said, her voice ringing with conviction. This man has cared for the soul of this place, its grounds. Now he will care for its heart. He has more integrity, decency, and wisdom in his little finger than the rest of this board combined. He knows what it means to treat every person with respect. He will be the new standard. She then looked directly at Mamadou. Mr. Thiam, would you like to say anything? This was the critical moment. The hero's voice. All eyes turned to the elderly groundskeeper, who was now the most powerful man in the room. He stepped forward, his initial shock giving way to a quiet, powerful composure. He looked not at the board, but at Adaeze. Thank you, Sister Adaeze, he said, his voice steady. He then turned to the board, his gaze sweeping over their stunned faces until it rested on the Millers. He did not look triumphant. He looked sad. I have worked here for 30 years, he said simply. I have always tried to do good work, to be a good man. On Sunday, I only wanted to share my food with my friend. That is all. He paused, and the simplicity of his words was more damning than any accusation. This is a beautiful place, he said, gesturing to the room, the view outside. But a place is only as beautiful as the people inside it. I hope now we can make the inside as beautiful as the outside. He said nothing more. He didn't need to. His quiet dignity had said it all. The transformation of Oakwood Crest began that very day. Under Adaeze's ownership and Mamadou's management, the club was reborn. The stuffy, exclusionary rules were torn up. A new charter was written, one that emphasized community, inclusivity, and service. The club partnered with local schools, creating mentorship programs and sports clinics for children from all backgrounds. The grand ballroom, once reserved for the elite, now hosted community fundraisers and cultural festivals. The air of silent, starched judgment was replaced with the sounds of laughter and life. Mamadou thrived in his new role. He managed the club with the same care and attention to detail he had once reserved for his roses. He knew every staff member by name, listened to their concerns, and treated them with the respect they had never known under the old management. He was firm but fair, wise and compassionate. He was, as Adaeze had known he would be, the club's true heart. As for the Millers, their fall was as swift as it was complete. Stripped of their power base at the club, their social standing evaporated. The friends who had once flocked to their parties now crossed the street to avoid them. Their world, built on a foundation of exclusion and snobbery, had collapsed. They sold their mansion in Tuxedo Park and moved to a smaller, nondescript condo, their days of influence and authority over. Several months later, the newly renamed Oakwood Community Center held its first annual neighborhood festival. The lawns were filled with families from every part of the city. The smell of barbecue mingled with the scent of suya and jollof rice from various food stalls. Music played, and children ran freely on the grass that Mamadou had once tended so meticulously. Adaeze was there, not as the owner, but as a guest dressed in her simple, comfortable clothes. She was watching a group of children in a sack race when she saw them. The Millers. They were standing awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, looking lost and out of place. They looked older, diminished, the arrogance stripped away, leaving behind something fragile and uncertain. No one was speaking to them. They were invisible, just as they had once made others feel. Adaeze watched for a moment, then she walked over to the Senegalese food stall where a woman was serving plates of fragrant thieboudienne. She got 2 plates and walked toward them. As she approached, they saw her and flinched, expecting more scorn, more humiliation. Mrs. Miller couldn't meet her eyes. Mr. Miller just stared at the ground. Adaeze stopped in front of them and held out the plates. They looked at the food, then at her, confused. Before she could speak, a gentle voice came from behind her. It was Mamadou. He had seen her and come over. He stood beside her, his presence calm and reassuring. He looked at the Millers, his eyes holding no malice, only a deep, quiet pity. He took one of the plates from Adaeze and held it out to them. "You are hungry," Mamadou said, his voice soft, the words echoing a moment that had changed all their lives. "We have food. It is simple." It was the callback, the exact words of grace he had offered Adaeze on that public bench. The words that had saved her dignity now being offered to save theirs. Hearing those words in that context from that man finally broke them. Mrs. Miller let out a choked sob, her carefully constructed facade shattering into a million pieces. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at the man she had so cruelly dismissed. Mr. Miller's eyes welled up, his face crumpling with the shame that was years overdue. We are so sorry," he stammered, his voice thick. "We were wrong." Mamadou simply nodded. He placed the plates of food in their trembling hands. "Eat," he said gently. "Today, everyone eats." He and Adaeze walked away, leaving the Millers to their tears and their thieboudienne, a meal of grace they had not earned, but which was given freely anyway. It was the final pillar. Justice had been served, but grace had the last word. Later that evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the happy crowd, Adaeze and Mamadou sat at the club's finest table on the grand terrace, the one that the Millers had once considered their personal property. Before them were 2 steaming plates of thieboudienne, prepared especially for them by the club's chef using Mamadou's wife's recipe. They ate in comfortable silence, watching the community they had built. "You know," Mamadou said, a twinkle in his eye, "this new job has so much paperwork. Tending roses was much simpler." Adaeze laughed, a sound full of warmth and joy. "But the harvest is much better, my friend." "Yes," he agreed, looking out at the diverse, happy faces. "The harvest is much better. Every tale has a lesson, and Channel Name never forgets." The story of Adaeze and Mamadou reminds us of a simple, powerful truth, a proverb from the Wolof people. A stranger has big eyes but sees nothing. True worth is not in what we wear or what we own, but in how we treat the person beside us. It teaches us that the greatest power is not the ability to buy the world, but the grace to share a plate of food with a friend in need. If you believe that kindness is the ultimate currency and that dignity is everyone's birthright, subscribe to our channel. There are more stories to tell.